Hey there folks, and welcome to the second and last video for Chapter 17, The Evolution of Plant and Fungal Diversity. Hold on folks, brace yourselves. We've got a lot of vocabulary coming because I've got fungi coming at you now. When we talk about fungi, you're probably going to imagine mushrooms. And yeah, a lot of fungi are mushrooms, but not all of them. We're going to get into some of the different types. Generally speaking, here's how they're built, though. While they may look like plants, or plant-like, don't be mistaken. Plants can make their own food, but fungi cannot. They are what we call heterotrophs, which means they have to get their food from somewhere else, through absorption. They secrete, or at least many different types of fungi, secrete digestive enzymes into the soil that they grow out of to help break things down in the soil surrounding them that they can then absorb and use to feed themselves. The structures that they use to do this are called hyphae, as you see here. They are thin, hair-like fibers. When you get a whole mat of them growing together, the mat of hyphae is called a mycelium. Inside the cells of the fungus, they have a cell wall, much like we do in plants. But whereas in plants, the cell wall is reinforced with cellulose and with lignin to make it stronger, in fungi, chitin is used. Now we find chitin in one other place in biology. Insects and their relatives. Yeah, the same molecule that makes the exoskeleton of a beetle, a butterfly, a tasty lobster or crab, also is what helps reinforce the cell walls of fungi so that they can be strong enough to physically support themselves. While many different types of fungi digest down nutrients out of the soil surrounding them, but decomposing things in the soil as they do so, not all fungi survive this way. A very important type of fungi form what are called mycorrhizae. A mycorrhiza is a form of symbiosis, that is a win-win cooperative relationship between two different types of living organisms. Mycorrhizal fungi have a symbiotic relationship with plants. There are particular types of plants that form nodules, little knots and nodes in their roots that the fungi live in. And by helping to break down things in the soil around those roots, the fungi get a safe place to live, and they get those nutrients, but the plant also gets some of the nutrients that get broken down out of the soil as well. Win-win situation. Other fungi are parasites, which means they grow on another living thing. And instead of breaking down things out of the soil, they break down the other living thing that they are living on. You may see parasitic fungi growing on the side of a tree. Their hyphae are digging down into the wood of that tree and slowly digesting bits and pieces of that tree. Some types of fungi can even infect animals, like say, you ever had a really nasty foot infection? Ooh, an athlete that didn't wash their feet well enough? Oh yeah, you can get a fungal infection, and they are not fun. When fungi reproduce, we end up with a life cycle that looks a lot like the alternation of generations that we get in plants, with some odd things thrown in. Remember, in a lot of ways, fungi look and act like plants, but they are not plants. They are different from plants in some very important ways. Now, the same way that you see a haploid and a diploid stage in alternation of generations in plants, you can get haploid asexual reproduction, where the entire species may just reproduce asexually, or you have some species that can do both. They can go back and forth, depending on what stage they are in. The really odd thing about particular fungi is this little area over here. intermediate between the haploid stage, which in fungi is really the vast majority of their life cycle. The diploid stage, the diploid generation, or alternation of generations for fungi, really doesn't actually last that long. It's a very, very short part of their cell cycle. Almost as short is this unusual stage up here, called the heterokaryotic stage. The heterokaryotic stage is on the way from the haploid stage, producing spores, germinating those spores, either splitting off and just doing asexual reproduction, where they're basically cloning themselves, or going through and going through fertilization, where the fertilization is sort of put on hold. The heterokaryotic stage is when you have two nuclei in the cells of that stage, but they're two nuclei from different parents, from the two different parents of sexual reproduction. Sort of, if you'd fused, right before you fused, if you frozen the moment of fertilization, right before the DNA from sperm, the DNA from the egg combine normally, if you just sort of put that on hold, sometimes for hours, in some species for hundreds of years, check that one out, until the conditions are correct, and then the heterokaryotic stage will end, time sort of clicks back in for fertilization, and the two nuclei, one from either parent, fuse and the DNA combines just as normal in an event called a karyogamy. That's this over here. Afterwards, you get a normal zygote. You undergo meiosis from that zygote, making brand new gametes, and life continues as usual. So remember, this looks a lot like alternation generations. Haploid stage, diploid stage, but this is a little different. The vast majority of this life cycle, between sexual and asexual reproduction, is haploid, not diploid. Diploid is really not for very long, and you've got this weirdness going on up here that really sets fungi aside from plants. Now, most forms of fungi will undergo sexual reproduction, but again, there's these folks over here that only really undergo sexual reproduction. It's the only way they make spores. Fungi that live in this fashion are typically called imperfect fungi. Classic examples are our molds and our yeasts. A mold refers to any quickly growing fungus that reproduces asexually by producing spores. Yeast, on the other hand, really refers to any single-celled fungus, such as the classic baker's yeast that we rely on to make bread. Other types of fungi include these folks. This is another phylogenetic tree showing us differences between change over time. One of the very first groups of fungi to ever split off are these folks, the chytrids. Chytrids are the only fungi still around to have flagellated spores. They're sort of spores that are halfway between being little sperm and being spores. They're the earliest lineage of fungi, and you tend to find them in lakes, ponds, and soil. Next up, we have zygomycetes. Zygomycetes have protective zygosporangium, where the zygotes produced by haploid spores are made through meiosis, and they have some way of actually protecting those structures as it goes on. Next up, we have glomeromycetes. These include the fungi that form mycorrhizae with plants. In fact, that is a picture, that's a photo of mycorrhizal fungi living in symbiosis with some plant roots. That's them right there. Next up, we have ascomycetes. No, they do not wear ascots. They are not terribly preppy. These are sac fungi. Uh, they have sac-like structures that look like pouches, and this is where they produce their spores during sexual reproduction. They form these sort of cup-like shapes. These organisms are usually marine, freshwater, or even terrestrial, and they range in size all the way from unicellular yeasts, pardon, I can talk, to delicious morels that have such wonderful flavor. However, when we think classic fungus, we're thinking of these guys. Basidiomycetes, club fungi. No, they are not called club fungi just because some of them have a club-like shape. That is a delicious looking sep mushroom. They are ever so tasty. Slice them up, fry them in a pan with butter. Nummy. They're actually named club fungi after the shape of their structure that makes spores. It's shaped like a little pedestal. And in fact, basidiomycete comes from the Latin word basidium, meaning little pedestal. And this includes all of your classic mushrooms, both the shelf fungi that you might see growing on the side of a tree, to field mushrooms that you pick up in the grocery store, and all of the poisonous mushrooms as well that you really want to stay away from. So, where do we encounter mushrooms, and what are they good for? Well, they play a massive role in breaking down waste in the soil and recycling nutrients back into the soil. Those hyphae mats that spread out through the soil around a fungus break down organic matter that's there in the soil so that the fungus can access those nutrients. But they're not the only ones that get to access those nutrients once they've been broken down. The digesting action of these fungi help break down dead wood, dead animals, all kinds of things that otherwise would just sit in the soil full of nutrients that no one can get a hold of. We, as humans, specifically use fungi in a lot of places. We use them to make different types of cheese, like blue cheese. If you like blue cheese or blue cheese dressing on your salad, you can thank fungi for the existence of your blue cheese. They help make that really distinctive blue cheese flavor as the cheese is aging. If you're someone like me, you just cook those mushrooms up and you enjoy them because they are delicious. But fungi, are also where we found our very first antibiotics. Classically, things like penicillin, which was the very first antibiotic doctors ever isolated, and guess what? We found it in a fungus. It's how they protect themselves from bacterial infection. Where else do we find fungi? Sometimes in some pretty surprising places. These are photos of a life form called lichen. You'll see them growing on rocks or even on the sides of trees in areas at higher altitude or that just get more rain than Southern California does. This is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms. You're actually looking at photos of different types of fungi and algae growing together, interwoven with each other. Different species and different types of relationships form mats, these sort of scale-like, strong, tough mats of different colors. They're so closely intertwined that even on a microscopic level, they're growing in and out of each other and wrapped around each other. The algae helps provide a place for the fungus to live, and the same way that we see amongst plant roots and mycorrhizal fungi and mycorrhizae, the fungi help digest down local nutrients, and that benefits the algae. You get some kind of drab colors, but you can also get some vivid reds, oranges, and yellows, as well as some pretty cool greens and some that are almost blue, depending on where you are in the world. And I know I've mentioned them a time or two, but check out what these mycorrhizae can do. We, as humans, with our farmers and our agricultural life, we use mycorrhizae all the time to benefit us because of how they benefit plants. This is what it looks like to compare a plant that is growing without mycorrhizae to help bring in extra nutrients to the plant and extend just how far its active root base goes, and without. Compare with mycorrhizae, help bringing in all kinds of extra nutrients to that plant, and without mycorrhizae. This isn't fertilizer. This is a symbiotic relationship, giving you tons of extra growth. And if you want an example of some plants where this is useful, that's rosemary. That's a common cooking herb. We use that all over the place. There are tons of different plants that we use in our agriculture to feed ourselves that can benefit from growing with mycorrhizae. It means we don't have to feed them as much because they can get more nutrients more successfully on their own because they have the help of this other organism. Not all fungi are so necessarily helpful, though. Remember how I talked briefly about parasitic fungi? Yeah. They're coming after plants and animals, too. These are two different examples of parasitic fungi. One that infects the seed bodies of this conifer, growing inside it around the seeds and eventually bursting out through the outside of the plant ovary. And this one takes over different types of insects, works its way up to their brain, and explodes. Yeah, explodes slowly, pushes its way through the, in this case an ant, exoskeleton so it can release its spores out into the world. That way it can go hijack another insect somewhere else. These are some crazy, creepy, weird-looking structures, but remember, it's just this fungus trying to survive. Sometimes we eat them, and they're delicious, and sometimes they take over our brains. And you thought biology was going to be boring. Alright folks, this is going to wrap it up for Chapter 17, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys, and take care.